America's most scenic drives. Join us in the eastern United States as we venture along our nation's most magnificent highways and byways. The open road beckons, and together we'll see and do it all. From Maine's inspiring mountains to the emerald seas of Florida's Keys, and every wondrous place in between. You'll explore picturesque New England towns and stop at magnificent lighthouses and endless stretches of sandy beach. Then it's off to New Hampshire and Vermont for the very peak of foliage season. On this trip, you'll always be in the right place at the right time. Ride to the base of Niagara Falls. Roll through Pennsylvania's Amish country and marvel at nature's wonders in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. And your adventures have only just begun. You'll watch the fabled pony swim on Chincoteague Island. Float aboard a paddle boat on the Mississippi and explore places where few others have ever gone. On this journey of a lifetime, all you need to bring is a spirit of adventure. So leave your worries behind and let us do the driving. The first adventure begins on Maine's seacoast, tracing along Route 1 from Portland to Acadia National Park. Setting out early, the morning mist still shrouds the Maine coast. On this wild and craggy shoreline, the weather can change in the blink of an eye. The fog lifts with the rising sun. And upon reaching Pemaquid Point, the skies are a deep blue. A short hike leads up to one of the most scenic beacons on the East Coast. First lit in 1835, the Pemaquid Lighthouse is one of a string alerting sailors to steer clear of the rocky coastline. Back on the road, quaint villages like Camden and Belfast pass by. In the mid-1800s, these sleepy towns were the shipbuilding heart of America. They coursed with energy and industry, supplying the vessels and men that crossed the globe in trade with China and Europe. A little further north, and the roads hug craggy outcroppings and pass through dark green forests of pine and spruce. In the heart of this beautiful land lies Acadia National Park. Acadia covers some 46,000 acres, including roughly half of stunning Mount Desert Island. Incredibly, these coves and inlets were carved by glaciers during the last ice age 12,000 years ago, leaving behind the only fjord on America's east coast, as well as a lovely coastline. And today, the ocean waves continue where the glaciers left off. Each breaker erodes a tiny bit more from the seemingly unyielding granite. Further along the road at Thunder Hole, the true fury of the ocean is revealed. Here, waves rush into a natural channel and crash into the rocks. Still, hardy souls brave the seas off Mount Desert Island for their living. Each day, in all sorts of weather, this lobsterman pulls hundreds of traps from the frigid Maine waters. These lobsters will be off to market in a matter of hours. Buoys proudly display their owner's individuality. Each lobsterman marks his traps with his own unique design. Lobsters are practically a required meal on any tour of Acadia. But Maine offers other delicacies that are just as irresistible. Little roadside stands beckon, especially at the height of blueberry season. Maine blueberries grow wild on the hillsides, and their rich fruit combines the sweet and tang that characterize this land. Deeper into Acadia National Park, the road leads up to Cadillac Mountain. It is the highest point on the entire eastern seaboard and affords fantastic views. Below lies Frenchman Bay, named for the area's first settlers. Almost 300 years ago, French frigates hid in these waters, waiting to ambush their English rivals. Visitors now search the waters for different but equally elusive characters. Whales, finback, which can be 84 feet in length, and humpback whales that pass off of Mount Desert Island during their seasonal migrations. But only part of Acadia rests along the ocean. Follow almost any road, and it will lead to great places to get out of the car and explore on foot. It's not hard to find a quiet corner. Acadia has 120 miles of hiking trails. Many of which lead to serene mountain ponds, peaceful spots abounding with life. Much of the park can be reached with just a short walk. But for those who don't feel like hoofing it, there are other options. Carriage roads lace much of the park. Trotting along at a leisurely pace, you can get a sense of what it must have been like during America's Gilded Age, when families like the Rockefellers and Morgans vacationed here. On the northeastern edge of Acadia stands the town of Bar Harbor. This was the resort of choice for America's elite at the turn of the 20th century. Fortunately, some of the finest mansions can still be enjoyed today. They are the survivors of the catastrophic 1947 fire that destroyed many magnificent Bar Harbor homes. This mansion contains 42 rooms. Amazingly, mansions like this were known to their owners as cottages. But there was nothing rustic about them. This 1910 mansion has been lovingly restored and maintained down to the finest detail. There's no better way to end a long day on the road than this. Settling into a comfortable chair and relaxing with a good book. The sun sets on this magical land, marking the end to a glorious day. Our next journey is one of surf and sun, carrying us from quaint Nantucket Island to the sandy shores of Cape Cod at the height of summer. Nantucket lies 30 miles from the Massachusetts coast. The Wampanoag tribe called this island Land Far Out to Sea. First settled by Europeans in 1659, the cobblestoned Maine town retains all the charm of New England's bygone times. In the early 19th century, Nantucket's sailing fleet dominated the whaling business. Today, few places can rival the beauty of its flower-bedecked cottages. Nantucket's small streets and back roads are still a place where neighbors stop to chat. And there's no better way to explore than on a bike. Paths and bike-friendly roads lace the island. 14 miles long and 3.5 wide, it's easy to explore much of this crescent-shaped island on bike or foot. But more beaches await at the next destination. Ferries shuttle back and forth to Cape Cod. White clapboard towns like Brewster, Truro, and Provincetown skirt the ocean. Even the churches reflect how lives along this coast are linked forever to the sea. Past Cape Cod's saltwater marshes, a veritable mountain range of dunes, and hidden paths that lead through dune grasses, you'll discover endless stretches of gorgeous beach. The perfect place to go fly a kite or build a sandcastle. Strong tides shift these sandy beaches, creating unusual spits and jetties. But there is one constant along the coast. This lighthouse anchors the shoreline like an ancient lifeguard perched on the cliff above. In 1716, Boston merchants demanded a lighthouse to protect their wares from the treacherous seas. The Boston Lighthouse was the first in America, but many others were soon to follow. Today, they serve as a reminder of New England's seafaring past. Each has its own special appeal, from the quaint Highland beacon to the decommissioned Sentinel at Harding Beach. to the towering candy-striped Nauset Lighthouse. For now, though, the seas are calm. With the setting sun comes the end of another glorious day. It's time to reel in the last catch. A full moon rises over the water, signaling the end to this tour of the magnificent New England coast. The next leg of the journey leads us to an even more quintessentially New England scene. It travels from Franconia Notch in New Hampshire to Bennington, Vermont during one of nature's greatest fall displays. The journey begins in Franconia Notch in northern New Hampshire, where there's already a chill in the air. New Hampshire is known as the Granite State. This 40-foot-high rock formation is called the Old Man in the Mountain because it resembles a human profile. The American author Nathaniel Hawthorne used it as the inspiration for his story, The Great Stone Face. But every year, one of the most dramatic transformations imaginable occurs here, the spectacular foliage of autumn. Maple, oak, and birch forests paint these valleys. To get a real sense of this splendor, climb out of the car and set out on foot. The warm days and long, cool nights of New England's autumn are said to produce these uniquely brilliant and radiant hues. From above, the hillsides look as if they've caught fire, the scattered scarlets and gold standing out against the cool blue sky and green pines. In the heart of New Hampshire stand the White Mountains. Here, an old-fashioned cog railway has carried passengers since 1869 up and down Mount Washington, the tallest peak in the entire Northeast. For P.T. Barnum, this breathtaking ride was part and parcel of what he called the second greatest show on Earth. Heading west into Vermont, we drive through such quaint towns as Stowe, Newfane, and Bennington. Newfane is a charming village of clapboard houses and steepled churches, all set around a quiet town common. The way of life seems more informal, and the only ones wearing ties are scarecrows. The stores stock local specialties like fudge, maple syrup, and handmade crafts. For almost 250 years, people have farmed these valleys and hills, improving the land. And some still carry on the traditional ways. Old-fashioned equipment produces a drink always found in New England in the fall: fresh apple cider. A drive down one of Vermont's many quiet byways takes in some of the most beautiful autumn foliage of all. The locals enjoy the last warm autumn days before the harsh New England winter settles in. This sleigh is a reminder that the first snowfall lies just around the corner. One last look down a country lane fringed by an orange carpet of leaves, and then back on the road. Next stop, one of the masterpieces of nature that simply can't be missed. As you approach, small rapids hint at what lies ahead. Niagara Falls. The air grows misty. The ground seems to rumble. The Niagara River links Lake Erie with Lake Ontario and divides America from Canada. It is a place of unrivaled force and raw energy. Close to 1 million gallons of water flow over the falls every minute, then plunge more than 170 feet to the river below. Dozens have attempted to ride over the rapids in barrels or small boats. But vessels like this, made of the mist, offer better ways to get a closer look. Sailing directly into the torrent, everything fades into the mist for a minute. Then, Horseshoe Falls appears. Back on the shore, visitors in yellow slickers venture into the mist. They cling to the pedestrian bridge on Goat Island. With tons of water crashing headfirst just inches from their faces, they've gotten close enough to Niagara's epic power. They leave this last section to the brave or foolhardy. A rainbow springs from the base of the falls. This happens only when the sun strikes the mist at just the right angle. What a truly magical place. Our next adventure begins in the Amish country of rural Pennsylvania and carries to the Shenandoah Valley's Skyline Drive in Virginia. Rolling through the charming hilly countryside of central Pennsylvania, you'll discover small farms set in towns with names like Lancaster, Bird in Hand, and Paradise. But slow down to share the road with a remarkable sight: a horse and buggy. This is the heart of Amish country, where the people follow simple, peaceful lives in accordance with the teachings of the New Testament. Here, horsepower is just that, and black-smocked farmers till the land much as their ancestors did in the early 1700s when they first settled in America from Europe. They forsake modern equipment signifying their rejection of the material world, but hard work makes the Amish some of the world's most productive farmers. While the men are famed for the bounty of their harvest, few can rival the Amish women for the quality of their handiwork. Quilts decorate a farm wife's clothesline. Each of these creations is unique to its designer, like a signature in fabric and stitching. Farther down the road, a little stand sells homemade goods. Relishes, jams, and jellies, all made by hand from recipes that go back to the old world. Amish craftsmanship is hardly confined to food, though. Even the simplest of Amish crafts has a spiritual dimension. They take the biblical commandment against graven images literally. Even dolls don't have human faces. This is a simpler way of life, regulated by the rise and fall of the sun and the turning of the seasons. But it's time to set off to another place renowned for its rich farmland, the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia and its famous Skyline Drive. The Shenandoah National Park surrounds this route with its winding roads lined by towering trees. Skyline Drive provides 75 scenic overviews. At one, a vista of gentle green slopes opens up, affording a gorgeous view. This wasn't always the case. Until 1935, when the park was established, farmers and loggers owned this land, and the hillsides were once covered in fields and stumps. But the Park Service has left its own mark on the land with the engineering wonders of Skyline Drive. Mary's Rock Tunnel, built in 1932, bores through 600 feet of bedrock. The region abounds with battlegrounds where Civil War enthusiasts relive the past. During the Civil War, Union and Confederate troops swept back and forth through the Shenandoah in battles that literally pitched brother against brother. Confederate General Stonewall Jackson repeatedly outwitted and outmaneuvered his Union adversaries in the Shenandoah Campaign of 1862. Today, the people reenacting Jackson's great victories, such as Front Royal, Cross Keys, and Port Republic, take pride in duplicating every detail of the historic clashes. After the roar of musket and cannon fire, it's a nice break to get back on the road and into the quiet of Skyline Drive. Big Meadows is a great place to pull over and relax. Its 123 acres of unforested land allows wildflowers to flourish. This section of the park was cleared by Native Americans more than 200 years ago. Today, though, the forest is slowly restaking its claim to the land. From a placid pool at a valley bottom, you can follow a stream up to its source. The higher it rises, the quicker the water seems to drop, creating a frothy brew in the eddies below. Then, where the underbrush yields and a meadow edges the creek, a lone doe appears. White-tailed deer prefer a habitat of woods and thickets interspersed with meadows, making this quiet grove an idyllic spot to graze. It's a peaceful scene where even two mature bucks only seem to go through the motions of jousting. When the deer meander back into the thickets, it's time to head back down to the car. One last look at this wondrous landscape, then on to the next stage of our trip. This drive starts on the outer banks of the United States at Chincoteague and Assateague Islands in Virginia, then points us south and west along the Blue Ridge Parkway. Along the marshy lands that fringe Maryland and Virginia's eastern shore, it's hard to tell where the Atlantic Ocean ends and solid earth begins. Roaming wild on these untamed islands are animals that belong to neither the land nor the sea. They are the ponies of Chincoteague and Assateague Islands. Local lore holds that these beautiful animals were born of the sea, that they swam to shore from a shipwrecked Spanish galleon in the 1500s. Once here, they made this mystical land their home. But once a year, their idyllic island life is suddenly transformed. Chincoteague is a community that still makes its living from the ocean. But it's the ponies that capture the imagination of visitors. Every July, locals hold the world-famous Chincoteague pony penning and swim. The wild ponies have just been rounded up. "50 years ago, the classic children's book Misty of Chincoteague by Marguerite Henry portrayed the lives and adventures of these graceful animals. In a ritual that goes back generations, the volunteer fire department has penned the ponies on the Assateague side and will soon swim them over to Chincoteague. There, some of the newborn foals will be auctioned off to keep the herd size at 150, so it won't overgraze the fragile island. Low tide arrives. The volunteer firemen gathered the ponies on the mudflats of Assateague. From the Chincoteague side, you can get a front-row view to a magical event, the Pony Swim. The ponies make the 100-yard swim in about 10 minutes. On the Chincoteague shore, the ponies rest for an hour. Then they're off again, this time in a parade. Everyone, including the ponies, seems to be having a grand time. The ponies are led into the town's carnival grounds safe and sound after their adventurous morning. Tomorrow after the auction, the ponies will return to Assateague. Where they'll resume the cycle of life that's as regular and mysterious as the seasons. The road leads west for the next leg of the trip. Crossing through much of Virginia, the tidewater gives way to the Piedmont, and then mountains appear ahead. In western Virginia stands a fantastic place where a stream has tunneled through the stone for 200 million years, leaving a span called Natural Bridge. 215 feet high, Natural Bridge is so spectacular, Thomas Jefferson acquired it and often visited. Before him, the Monacan tribe held it sacred as the Bridge of God. Back in the car, it's time to head to the nearby Blue Ridge Parkway, named for the blue hue of its peaks. Passing vistas of steep slopes that give way to misty hollows, the road tunnels through mountains, and pushes on into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. These are some of the highest mountains east of the Mississippi River and are called the Smokies because of the thick mist that often covers them. This is one of the wildest spots in the American East, so don't be surprised to spot a bear or two. Only 200 years ago, this was America's frontier. Back then, hardy pioneers settled the mountain vales, hewing log cabins from the surrounding forest. This white clapboard church testifies to the bedrock faith of the mountain folk. The first settlers came from Scotland and Germany, seeking freedom and land to call their own. And North Carolina's isolated valleys suited their independent ways. They preferred to rely only on themselves and learned the skills needed for self-sufficiency. Today, their descendants carry on many of the traditional ways. The North Carolina hills are famous for their weavers, some of whom, like this artist, shear and spin their own wool. And these birds are carved by hand by artists who learned their trade at the feet of fathers and grandmothers. But the craft these hills are most renowned for is music. Bluegrass is known as the high, lonesome sound, a perfect match for the landscape. No matter the occasion, there's a better than even chance that some of the guests will be ready to take up an instrument and pick out a traditional tune. With the music still playing, it's time to return to the car and wish this wonderful place a fond farewell. No tour of America would be complete without a drive along the mighty Mississippi River. Starting at Hannibal, Missouri, our journey now follows the river south to Natchez, Mississippi. The streets of Hannibal, Missouri are where Samuel Clemens, later known as Mark Twain, ran wild as a child. In Twain's youth in the 1840s, Hannibal was a frontier town on the Mississippi River. And it's hard to imagine a writer who embodied the spirit of early America more. The Mark Twain Museum is a great place to learn about life in the 1840s and how Twain's youth shaped his later writing. His famous characters, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, were formed from an amalgam of boyhood friends. But of Twain's many memories, the ones that stand out above all others revolve around paddle steamboats. One of Twain's favorite jobs was as a pilot's assistant, and he even took his pen name from the call Mark Twain, used on these boats to signal safe water. With a ride on the Mississippi Queen, it's easy to see why Twain loved the river so much. Paddle boats still ply the river much as the ones Twain piloted, and the sound of their steam whistles still thrills today. Back on shore, the road follows the river south. Stretches of the Mississippi River seem as untamed as they were 150 years ago. The road carries on to the deep south, to where cotton was once king, Natchez, Mississippi. Some of the largest antebellum mansions in the South were built in this region. The houses are so grand, they even have names of their own, such as Dunleith. This mansion is a marvel from every angle, its facade covered in pillared porches. Behind these mansions, you'll find reminders of the work it took to keep these plantations functioning. Today, at Rosalie, it's not unusual to come across Southern belles reenacting the past. Or to find a fleeting moment that seems to evoke the storied histories of these great mansions. Back at the river, at the end of a long day, the lingering light of sunset seems to caress the mighty Mississippi. Morning starts in Georgia, where the route travels from genteel savanna to the wilds of the Okefenokee Swamp. The crashing surf and endless stretches of pristine beach north of Savannah serve as the perfect starting point for the next adventure. On the city's waterfront stands an unusual sight. This is a monument to Florence Martis. Local legend holds that when she was 18, Martis fell in love with a sailor who went to sea and never returned. Martis spent almost every day for 44 years waving and greeting to passing ships, welcoming sailors to Savannah. It comes as no surprise that the citizens of Savannah chose to immortalize Martis. Her hometown is the very essence of Southern hospitality. Elegant streets lead to gorgeous, welcoming fountains. But park the car. This is a city best viewed on foot. Like the Spanish moss that clings to its trees, history drapes Savannah's lanes. Founded in 1733, Savannah is the oldest English settlement in Georgia. Its name is likely a derivative of the local Native American tribe's title, the Shawnee. This was one of the first planned cities in America. Today, every corner still holds one classic treasure after another. But from these genteel byways of Savannah, the road carries on to wilder places. Outside of Savannah, pull over to savor some of the state's famed produce, Georgia peanuts, and of course, its unrivaled peaches. Then it's off to a place where it's eat or be eaten. This is the Okefenokee. The largest swamp in North America, covering over 600 square miles. The name Okefenokee comes from the Native American words meaning land of the trembling earth. Peat deposits on the swamp's floor are so unstable, trees and bushes can quiver when people walk past. But the slow-moving waters are an ideal home for wildlife. Since the 1850s, trappers and hunters have used the few pieces of solid ground here to fish and hunt. And some are still at it. Tannic acid released from decaying vegetation turns the water this tea color. At the end of the day, it's time to travel from the moss-covered stretches of Georgia to a realm yet further south. "1,600 miles from Maine, where this journey started, the next and last adventure begins. It steers south from the coast of Florida to Key Largo, and then on to Key West. At the very tip of the Florida Peninsula stands one of the great man-made wonders of the world, the Overseas Highway. This engineering marvel contains 42 bridges and runs for 127 miles, connecting the sun-drenched islands known as the Florida Keys. Key Largo is a must for nature lovers. The John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park is America's first undersea park. You can take a tour on a glass-bottom boat to the multicolored coral reefs to watch the sights in comfort. Or you can experience the beauty of the park from even closer up by renting a dive boat and speeding out to the coral reef. The waters are so clear, you can literally see the bottom. The coral reef is a living, moving wonderland. Fish dart in and out of the graceful, waving coral, and a school of silver flashes past. This reef contains an amazing diversity of life, with some 500 species of fish, all depending on the health of these fragile corals. But the most unexpected and supernatural scene appears from out of the blue. This is Christ of the Deep, a statue anchored to the ocean floor. Now, bleached and weathered by the elements, this 9-foot bronze monument was placed here in 1965 to inspire those who work and play on the reef, as well as comfort those who've lost loved ones at sea. Back in the car, it's hard to imagine these waters as anything but peaceful and welcoming. But pirate dens once dotted the coast, and other locals called wreckers made a good living preying on ships that foundered on the reefs up until the end of the 19th century. Passing through mangrove swamps, it feels like a foreign land, and no wonder. Some of these islands lie closer to Havana, Cuba, than to Miami. You can press along the overseas highway until there's practically nowhere left to drive. This is Key West, one of America's most colorful towns. A great place to get out of the car and explore. Sloppy Joe's was a favorite watering hole for Ernest Hemingway. And don't be surprised if a Hemingway look-alike nonchalantly strolls right past. Hemingway lived here, drawn to Key West by its wild spirit and tropical beauty. Here he felt free among the town's offbeat personalities and found inspiration in the island's distinct character. A short drive away is another sort of refuge. In a neighborhood called the Truman Annex stands the Little White House. Harry Truman spent 175 days of his presidency on Key West among these shaded porches and quiet corners. This was his oasis. Key West is the perfect place to end this driving adventure. We have followed the call of the sea all the way to the sun-soaked Florida Keys. This fiery display produces a breathtaking finale for our driving tour of America's spectacular East Coast. America's most scenic drives. Join us in the heartland as we venture along our nation's most magnificent highways and byways. The open road beckons, and together we'll see and do it all. From stone arches that seem to span the sky, to the otherworldly wonders of the Four Corners region, this is one journey you'll never forget. You'll explore the enchanted land of Monument Valley, wind into the rugged Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and seek the hidden world of lost Native American tribes, rafting the legendary Rio Grande, and braving narrow mountain passes are just a few of the many adventures ahead. Ride into Telluride, the town where Butch Cassidy first made his name, but where mountain bikers and skiers now hold sway. And discover the romantic covered bridges of Madison County, home to great Americans like John Wayne. Then on into the Ozarks of Missouri, and that's not all. This journey carries us to the Badlands where bison still roam, onto Mount Rushmore, and into Cheyenne, Wyoming with its world-famous rodeo. On this journey, leave your worries behind and let us do the driving. The adventure begins in America's heartland. It's a journey from the golden fields of Iowa south to the green Ozarks and finally west to Branson, Missouri. Iowa. These rolling hills are home to a practical and down-to-earth people. But don't let appearances fool you. There's far more to this country than meets the eye. Charming Madison County is known as Iowa's Covered Bridge County. And no journey through the American heartland would be complete without a visit here. This is Cedar Bridge. Even though it's more than 100 years old, Cedar Bridge was so well built, cars can cross it to this day. The Cedar was one of 19 covered bridges in Madison County, but time and vandalism have left only 6. Further along in Madison County stands the Imes Bridge. Quaint structures, covered bridges served as the backdrop for the best-selling book, The Bridges of Madison County. In that story, a National Geographic photographer traveled to Madison to document these icons from a bygone era. Once here, he soon fell under their spell. Winding through the byways and back roads of Madison County, it's easy to appreciate the gentle allure of this country. Roads like this lead to the next bridge along the way, the Hollowell. These roofs were added to protect the bridges from the ravages of snow and ice. The sharp angle of the Hollowell's overhang ensured that wind-blown rain couldn't reach the floorboards below. A little further down the road is Winterset, the county seat. The first white settlers came here in 1846 and transformed the land through industry and tenacity. As if the covered bridges weren't enough, Madison's early residents also built this county courthouse. At its completion in 1876, it was considered one of the finest west of Chicago. Today, though, Winterset is best known as the birthplace of John Wayne, the embodiment of American grit. More bridges await along the roads that lead out of town. Miles of prime Iowa farmland lie between Winterset and Madison's more famous landmarks. Out here, the green corn seems to reach for the sky, while the rich purple of the clover and the creamy damask of Queen Anne's lace grace the route. As a bee buzzes in the afternoon sun, an ant helps itself to a meal of nectar, and sunflowers wave in the breeze. Nature seems to reign supreme where lush green fields are filled with contented cows. But then a fruit of man's labors comes into view. The Rosamond Bridge. This was the setting where the characters in the bridges of Madison County first fell in love. Today, a real couple exchanges vows at this bridge, a romantic wedding inspired by a modern fairy tale. These newlyweds have chosen each other much as their ancestors once chose to settle in the heartland of this country. They walk towards a future that's full of promise and joy. As the dusk draws in, the sun sets over Iowa's farm country and marks the end of a fruitful day. The next morning, an early start leads through River City, a small town of white houses and picket fences where the flag hangs just about everywhere. And children play much as they have for hundreds of years. Nothing could be more American. Unless it's a 4th of July parade, of course. River City, Iowa was the setting for the popular play, The Music Man. Clearly, Independence Day is a highlight of the year in these parts. Everyone gets in on the act. Marching is serious business here, and some of the best bands in the country come from Iowa. As the last band marches past, it's time to get back into the car and steer south. Here, deep in Missouri, it's hard to imagine a more relaxing drive than a spin through these lush green hills. Or any of the many picturesque sights the Ozarks offer. Crystal clear water rises from hidden springs, literally bubbling up through the rock, creating the sparkling wonderland that is the Missouri Ozarks. Broiling rapids alternate with tranquil creeks, and blue pools flow into icy brooks. At Big Spring, a short hike leads to a limestone cliff that floats above a seething cauldron of nature's finest water. Each day, 286 million gallons gushes up from deep beneath the ground and pours into the Current River. The Ozark streams are an angler's paradise, teeming with bass, bluegill, crappies, and trout. And when you've had your fill of fishing, you can take a dip in one of 1,000 dappled pools. Or maybe just let the rivers take you where they may. The beauty of the Ozarks is best seen from on high. And 2 miles west of the town of Branson, the aptly named Inspiration Tower rises above the trees. From here, you can look out onto the Ozarks Hills, where more fun-filled and fascinating destinations await in the hollows around Branson. Drive along the Ozarks byways, and you'll spot rough plank churches and log cabins hewn from the area's trees by its first resourceful settlers. At the family resort of Silver Dollar City, a group of musicians called the Homestead Pickers carries on the traditional ways of strumming and picking. Southwest of Branson lies Dogwood Canyon, a 10,000-acre private wilderness refuge. Here, you'll find a great place for biking and hiking. Amish craftsmen built this bridge. And today, elk have been reintroduced to roam much as they did hundreds of years ago. Pristine Dogwood Creek winds through the canyon. Follow the creek downstream, and it leads to Table Rock Lake. Here, the showboat Branson Belle plies the dappled waters. As this action-packed day comes to a close, a relaxing sunset cruise is the ideal way to cap off this leg of the trip. Our next journey starts in West Texas, the very home of the great outdoors. We'll take Route 170 east and make a grand loop through Big Bend National Park. This was once a country where only Apaches and desperados dared to roam. The Wild West of cattle drives and border raids, where brave men and women came in search of wide open spaces and rugged camaraderie.
Howdy. Good to see you.
Texas is known as the Lone Star State for good reason. Even oil pumpers seem to toil away on their own. Out here, hardy cowboys still pride themselves on independence and self-reliance and an ability to live off the land. And this, Big Bend National Park, may be the heart and soul of that land, the last true frontier of the Wild West. And it's a realm full of surprises. From between the sheer cliff faces of the Santa Elena Canyon appears a rolling ribbon of water, the storied Rio Grande. Cattle rustlers like the legendary bandit Pancho Villa once hid out along these banks. So much sand is carried in these waters, it turns the river a murky hue. But this same sand also gives it the grit to channel its way through these towering cliffs. Big Bend derives its name from a sharp curve that formed where the river cut through the rocks. Out in the desert heat, hardy souls leave their air-conditioned cars behind and take a slow ride down the Rio Grande. The river may look sluggish, but it's actually the most vital resource in all Big Bend. A band of emerald plant life flourishes along its banks. But with temperatures soaring into the hundreds, water soon drains from the sandy soil. Away from the river's banks, the vegetation thins. Still, the hardiest forms of life have adapted to the harsh desert and turned it green in places. It's a wonder that any man or animal would choose to call this desert home, but amazingly, it's a great place to find big game. Take this warning seriously. In the Chisos Mountains, at the center of Big Bend, mountain lion and black bear still reign at the top of the food chain. Soaring some 7,000 feet above sea level, the Chisos are a great place to search for something wild. The Chisos Basin Road offers great views, but keep your eyes on the road. Its hairpin turns and steep grades can make driving hazardous. Mule deer appear at the edge of a scrub pine grove. They seem wary, and they have every right to be. Deer are a favorite meal of Big Bend's greatest predator, the elusive mountain lion. Weighing as much as 165 pounds and able to cover 25 miles a day, these animals need a lot of space. And Big Bend provides it. The park covers an area the size of Rhode Island, giving these solitary creatures plenty of room. Another of Big Bend's remarkable animals is less shy and can be found near campsites. Perpetually hungry, black bears can and will eat almost anything. They graze like cattle when the grass is young and sweet, forage for grubs and roots, and will even stalk deer. At the end of this day at Big Bend, the road winds back down to the desert floor. The next adventure takes you to a realm far from the wide expanses of West Texas. The Four Corners region, the only place in America where 4 states meet. We journey from Bryce Canyon to Arches to Monument Valley and onto Mesa Verde on one of the great scenic drives in the American Southwest. In southern Utah, ponderosa pines give way to the fantastic landscape of Bryce Canyon National Park. Extending for 20 miles along the edge of a plateau, Bryce isn't really a canyon, more of a honeycomb of hollows and spires sculpted and eroded by thousands of years of wind and rain. These enchanting formations have been given an otherworldly moniker, hoodoos, so called because they resemble hooded ghosts. Some of these spectacular stone needles have names of their own. Thor's hammer because it looks like a tool worthy of the mighty Norse thunder god. And Tower Bridge, even though it's a long way from London. An 18-mile drive traces the canyon's rim, affording fantastic views. But to really experience Bryce, trade in your steering wheel for stirrups and head off on horseback along some of the park's 50 miles of trails. Even up close, Bryce continues to mystify. Something as simple as a tree becomes extraordinary, clinging to the edge of a cliff, or climbing toward the sun between walls of unyielding stone. According to geologists, these serried ranks of stone were painted glorious reds, oranges, and ochres by mineral oxidation. The effect produces one of the world's great natural light shows. Only a rainbow can rival the intense colors of Bryce Canyon. As the sun sets, the rocks seem to glow from within, granting a truly soul-stirring scene. The next morning, the road leads from Bryce and heads north and east to Arches National Park. Early settlers of the 19th century were so amazed by these formations, they thought they'd found the ruins of an earlier civilization. But a hike into the park for a closer look makes it clear that nature, not man, is the architect of these wonders. For more than 100 million years, a mix of icy winters and baking sun has slowly carved out the park's 2,000 arches, domes, tunnels, and spires, patiently crafting them into miraculous shapes. But man did give them fanciful names. These are known as the Three Gossips, standing frozen in mid-chatter for all eternity. This is the organ because it moans and trills in the wind. And though far from soft and woolly, this is sheep rock. Some names, of course, do describe reality. This is delicate arch. It seems to stretch across the sky in defiance of all the laws of gravity. Even more precarious is Landscape Arch. 300 feet long and weighing hundreds of tons, it tapers to a sliver that's only 6 feet wide. The whole structure could collapse at any moment, and rangers advise visitors to stay clear. Forging on past Arches, the road heads south to a rugged landscape long immortalized by Hollywood. A sky-piercing sentinel, Agathla Peak, stands guard at the entrance to this realm. Monument Valley, a tableau punctuated by vast spires, buttes, and pillars. This is John Ford Point, named for the great Hollywood director of such classic westerns as Stagecoach, Fort Apache, and The Searchers, all set here. Ford's films depicted larger-than-life characters battling each other and the elements in a wild landscape. Still, The silver screen can't do justice to this scene. Few places can rival Monument Valley for stark beauty and grandeur. Here are massive natural columns that tower nearly 1,000 feet above the rocky plain. The Navajo tribe has been caretaker here for generations, and they've set aside a spectacular 30,000-acre park. Its 17 miles of roadways can be rough, especially after rain, but they're well marked. The Navajo have embraced Monument Valley's nature as their own. And two of their finest traditional artists, teacher and student, perform a powwow dance at John Ford Point. Singing, drumming, and dancing still play integral roles in Navajo social and religious life, much as they have for hundreds of years. As the sun sets over Monument Valley, the land and its people seem ageless. Yet the Navajo speak of others who lived here even before they did. 1,000 years ago, centuries earlier than the Navajo, another people thrived here, then mysteriously disappeared. This lost civilization left few traces here. But in southwestern Colorado, it's another story. This is Mesa Verde National Park. It lies atop a green tableland laced with canyons. It's a place of concealed wonders, a place that remarkably thousands of men and women once called home. Their multi-storied dwellings cling precariously to the sheerest cliffs. Ladders were used to access the upper floors. The people who built these structures are known as the Anasazi, or Ancient Ones. For hundreds of years they hunted and farmed this land, but then, around 700 years ago, they vanished. No one knows exactly what happened to the Anasazi. They kept no written record. But the ghostly ruins they left serve as a spellbinding reminder of a remarkable culture. Mesa Verde is also the starting point for our next driving tour. It's a great loop called the San Juan Skyway that takes us east to Durango, north past Silverton, south through Telluride, and back almost to where we began. Following Route 160 east to the town of Durango is like setting out on an Old West adventure. Like a ghost train riding on rails of fire, the Durango-Silverton narrow-gauge railway comes down the tracks. Since 1882, $300 million worth of precious metals have been hauled along these tracks from the surrounding hills. For more than a century, too, passengers have been boarding the train just to enjoy the scenic ride. The locomotive is a vintage steam engine from the early 1920s, lovingly restored and maintained. The conductor calls, "All aboard, next stop Silverton." The 45-mile trip climbs nearly 3,000 feet and takes the train 3.5 hours. It's a wonderful way to travel, and for the first easy stretch in the valley, the train chugs along at quite a pace. But not for long. It can't keep up with a car when it hits the hills. The road leads on to Silverton. Once a mining town, Silverton makes its livelihood from its Arcadian setting, an ideal base for the hikers and skiers who come from around the world. This serpentine marvel of engineering is called the $1 Million Highway. Rock slides are common here, and much of the white-knuckled route passes without guardrails. It tunnels through the mountainside and hugs cliffs hundreds of feet above the valleys below. At Red Mountain Pass, you reach 11,018 feet, the highest point on the $1 Million Highway. There are many colorful stories about how the $1 Million Highway got its name. One tells it was the high cost of paving the old toll road. Another, from an earlier time, says one stagecoach passenger declared she wouldn't ride over the same route again for $1 million. Either way, it's a fitting name for a route that offers such a wealth of scenic overlooks around every corner. Ouray, called the Switzerland of America because of its nestled spot in an alpine hollow, flashes by. Then it's time to leave the San Juan Mountains behind, cross the broad valleys where True Grit and How the West Was Won were filmed, and head to the town where the real Wild West meets the 21st century. Telluride, Colorado. Locals say that history in Telluride is something you can feel, and on Main Street you can almost sense the colorful characters from another time. Butch Cassidy robbed his first bank here, setting off on one of America's most storied criminal careers. Telluride still has its share of real characters. But today's wild bunch rides into town on mountain bikes, not horses, and rustles up cappuccino instead of contraband. Telluride is a great place to get out of the car and stretch your legs. Some of the chicest stores east of Rodeo Drive line Main Street, and it's great fun to peruse the latest fashions in this relaxed setting. But natural wonders await just beyond the town limits. A 2-hour hike leads to a sight not to be missed: the exquisite Bridal Veil Falls. A 425-foot plunge turns much of the waterfall to mist long before it reaches the rocks below. The very best views of all, however, are accessible by neither car nor foot. Only a gondola ride can easily carry you high into the mountains. It's a wonder that in just a few months, snow will blanket these peaks and thousands will flock here for the unrivaled slopes. For now, though, a panorama of green unfolds around this storybook town. Leaving Telluride, the road travels south beside the Dolores River, skirting abandoned mines, all that remains of past gold and silver booms. Aspen trees flank the route in this, the last leg of the San Juan Skyway. Now sheer mountains give way to valley bottoms and farms. Gazing out on this splendid scene, two of nature's greatest wonders grace the landscape. A rainbow, chased by a bolt of lightning. With the setting sun, you reach the end of this journey around the San Juan Skyway. Our journey now runs east to west and takes us to the natural and man-made wonders of the Badlands, Mount Rushmore and Devil's Tower. The road crosses the upper plains of South Dakota, where pronghorn graze and bison spar as they have for eons, all under the watchful eyes of prairie dogs. This is an increasingly rare sight. Prairie dog colonies once covered the American plains, but today their numbers are dwindling. Development and cattle ranching have pushed prairie dogs out of many of their old habitats. It's a real treat to watch these playful, charming animals where they're safe in this priceless sanctuary, the Badlands National Park. Much of the rest of the Badlands, though, is far less hospitable. Clearly, it's a place deserving of its name. The road rolls through a landscape of sharply eroded buttes and spires, a veritable moonscape right here on Earth. All of the park's 244,000 acres are open to hikers, but stick to well-marked paths. It's easy to get lost in this disorienting landscape. Only bighorn sheep really seem at home. They clamber among the cliffs and gorges, feeding on thin grass and lichens. But where the Badlands edge the prairie, nature thrives. Once near extinction, these bison are staging a remarkable comeback. Though the massive herds that once stretched from horizon to horizon are gone, the Badlands is now one place where the buffalo still roam. From a vantage point on the rim of the Badlands, shadows lengthen across this jagged realm. The route leads west into the pine-covered Black Hills of South Dakota. Suddenly, like a mirage, four faces appear framed in a tunnel ahead. Washington, Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Lincoln all gaze out over the valley from the granite bluffs of Mount Rushmore. Measuring 60 feet from brow to chin, these carvings commemorate men who were giants in their lifetimes. Sculptor Gutzen Borglum and his crew blasted, drilled, and chiseled 500,000 tons of rock from the Black Hills during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And they chose the right material. Rushmore's granite erodes less than 1 inch every 10,000 years, ensuring that these portraits will be enjoyed by countless generations to come. As night falls, a spectacular light show takes place. At the next stop further west, even man's most noble creations can appear timid when compared to nature's. This is Devil's Tower, and it dwarfs everything around it. This natural monument rises 1,267 feet above the Belle Fourche River in Wyoming. 60 million years ago, a plume of liquid rock surged up from the Earth's molten crust, then cooled. As the surrounding rock eroded, this fanciful skyscraper appeared. Native American legend holds that this was the stump of a giant tree clawed by a bear. And more recently, it served as the fictional UFO observation post in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Today, people scramble among the rocks like spiders. Climbers flock to Devil's Tower, traversing its exposed rock faces and reveling in the views it affords. And what views there are! A stunning finale to this part of the trip. The next adventure leads us to Montana, almost to our nation's border with Canada. It travels east through Glacier National Park from Apgar to St. Mary along a road called Going to the Sun. This lofty kingdom is known as the crown of the continent. And this is one of its rarest jewels. Seen from above, Lake McDonald seems to point toward the mountains. And there's no better way to see this land than on the spectacular Going to the Sun road in the mountain paradise of Glacier National Park. Despite its twists and turns, the road carries you from west to east, guiding drivers toward the rising sun. This far north, fall comes early, turning the leaves gold, gilding each and every vista. Some, inspired by nature's paint box, pull over to capture the splendor on a canvas of their own. Along the winding road, thunderous Haystack Creek Falls comes into view. Beyond the cataract, vegetation in the ponds and marshy areas attracts moose. Two bulls, each weighing as much as 1,000 pounds, test their strength against each other. Near Avalanche Lake, thick stands of hemlock and cedar shade hiking trails, part of a 700-mile network that crisscrosses the park. Even a short walk can lead to some of the park's smaller but still wondrous sights. And there are plenty of alternatives for those who don't want to hike. Pushing further into the Rockies on the Going to the Sun Road, the peaks of the Continental Divide appear ahead. This is Logan Pass. At more than 6,600 feet, it's the highest point on the route. Here, alpine meadows and open slopes abound with countless flowers. Hiking even higher, puffy wands of beargrass dance in the breeze. Snow and ice adorn these mountaintops all year round. From Logan Pass to Hidden Lake, this land's a nature lover's dream. If you're lucky, you'll spot the park's signature animal, the mountain goat. Clearly, some have grown accustomed to human visitors. This Colombian ground squirrel is equally unafraid. Coyotes are a different story and for the most part keep to themselves. As recently as 1985, even this incredible sight was common when salmon still returned to spawn in Glacier. Dropping out of the mountains, the road passes through the aspens, alders, and birches that hem St. Mary Lake. A canoe ride takes its riders through a serene vista. Alone in this calm lake, Goose Island seems to float on the surface. As the sun sets on this majestic landscape, our next trip is already set to begin. The first stop, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Then it's west and north on Route 287 to Yellowstone National Park. Once a year in late July, Cheyenne hosts its world-famous Frontier Days and the daddy of all rodeos. First held in 1897, this event was the premier celebration of the Old West, long before the word rodeo had ever been invented. Back then, this was known simply as bucking and pitching. Today, more than 1,200 contestants compete for $500,000 in prizes. Cheyenne's Frontier Days provides more action in one day than most rodeos offer in a week. For these people, the Wild West is still very much a part of everyday life. "400 miles west, it's the same story, but this time in a natural setting. Founded as the first national park in the world, Yellowstone reigns as a place without peer, a kingdom of fire and water. Through the park's rustic gate stands a domain set aside by Congress over 125 years ago. 600,000 years before that, a cataclysmic volcanic eruption blew the center of the park sky high. Molten rock still lies near the surface, powering Yellowstone's thermal acrobatics. Some of the park's many boardwalks pass pools of clay that seethe and bubble. Rising steam churns these curiosities called mud pots. Some of them are scorching hot, reaching close to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. At Mammoth Hot Springs, white calcium carbonate leaches from limestone and forms terraced baths filled with superheated water. Some of these terraces grow as much as 22 inches a year. Algae bloom in this extreme environment, tinting the water various shades of green. But Yellowstone isn't just about thermal activity, it contains an abundance of wildlife too. On Fountain Flats Drive, a bull elk struts into view and bugles for his harem. His daunting rack of antlers is an awesome sight. You can press deeper into the park on horseback, through meadows dappled with vibrant wildflowers. In Yellowstone's interior, mountain vales yield to pristine brooks that race down the mountainsides. Amazingly, the high-altitude Yellowstone Lake is a refuge for pelicans. But before the sun sets on this wonderland, there's still time to catch Yellowstone's most famous display. More than 200 of the world's 500 active geysers reside here. Castle Geyser resembles a crumbling fortress, puffing out clouds of steam. Over half of the geysers in the park are located in the Upper Geyser Basin, within walking distance of the park's most popular attraction. Suddenly, Old Faithful explodes. Approximately every 88 minutes, the geyser erupts in a display that never ceases to amaze. Thousands of gallons of water and steam soar as high as 180 feet. Old Faithful gives vent to the awesome mystery and power underneath Yellowstone's surface. What a perfect end to this drive through America's heartland. America's most scenic drives. Join us in the western United States as we venture along our nation's most magnificent highways and byways. The open road beckons, and together we'll see and do it all. From the tropical paradise of Hawaii to the spectacular mountains of Washington State, and then on to the sparkling wonderland of Alaska. Along the way, you'll explore national parks that have inspired generations. Eureka, a quaint town of Victorian gingerbread houses, and even drive through towering redwood forests, all at your own pace. On this trip, you'll always be in the right place at the right time. Experience the incomparable Pacific Northwest, where wildlife roams free, and marvel at nature's wonders in the North Cascades National Park. And the adventure has only just begun. You'll discover Winthrop, Washington, where cowboys still ride into town, and cruise along the coast of wildest Alaska, where the lands are bounded by breathtaking ice fields. On this journey of a lifetime, all you need to bring is a spirit of adventure. So leave your worries behind and let us do the driving. Our adventure starts in America's tropical paradise on the Hawaiian islands of Hawaii and Kauai. The first route begins at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and leads north around the Big Island. These are the Hawaiian Islands, oases of green amidst the vast Pacific Ocean. Amazingly, the beauty and splendor of the Hawaiian Islands was born in a series of violent events. This tropical paradise formed as a string of volcanoes rose from the ocean floor. Fittingly, the first destination is Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, which covers 337 square miles on the Big Island of Hawaii. The road carries along Crater Rim Drive to the Kilauea Caldera. The Big Island is the youngest of the chain, having broken the surface of the ocean only 1 million years ago. Mount Kilauea continues to vent and erupt to this day. The awesome, destructive power of these volcanoes is made evident along Crater Rim Drive, a swath of desolation left from an eruption in 1969. But look closely, and an unlikely sight appears. Almost as soon as the nutrient-rich volcanic soil cools, life takes root. An amazing array of plants rise from the ashes. Traditional Hawaiians believe that Pele, the goddess of fire, resides in Mount Kilauea. At the rim of the volcano, they pay her tribute with dance and song. From Mount Kilauea, Hawaii's Route 11 heads north. Along this stretch, expect to encounter refreshing tropical rains. The eastern coastal town of Hilo receives over 120 inches a year, making it the wettest city in America. Just inland, the rain also feeds Rainbow Falls. Hidden behind the base of the falls lies a cave, and legend holds that Hina, the mother of the demigod Maui, lived here. Rich soil, plenty of rain, and a tropical setting combine to make Hawaii an exotic hotbed for plant life. The striking anthurium has become one of the signature flowers of these islands. Some of Hawaii's earliest plants and flowers were born here on the winds and waves from as far away as Southeast Asia. Over millions of years, they have evolved in remarkable ways, and more than 90% of all of Hawaii's native plants are unique to these islands. And the next leg of the trip takes us to a place so lush and green, it's known as the Garden Island, Kauai. Kauai stands at the other end of the Hawaiian chain from the Big Island. This is a realm of shady palm trees and blazing white beaches, long stretches of which are empty much of the day. The clear blue waters of these shores are the perfect place to snorkel or catch a wave. Jagged emerald cliffs and fanciful minaret-like formations are the result of volcanic activity, and the way these hills channel wind makes any sailing excursion a thrill. Further along Hawaii Highway 56, you'll come to Kilauea Point, the northernmost tip of Kauai. This lone sentinel has stood here since 1913, guiding ships around the rugged shore. A short walk to the lighthouse leads through a wildlife sanctuary rich in native birds, such as this white-tailed tropic bird. Kauai offers a diverse wealth of sights, and on the west side of the island, the startling rift called Waimea Canyon runs for 10 miles and is almost 3,600 feet deep. Millennia of wind and water have carved the canyon, but today non-native goats are eroding these multi-hued hillsides faster than nature. On the eastern side of the island, the abundant rainfall feeds the Wailua River, the only fully navigable river in Hawaii. A quiet boat ride is a great way to explore the island's interior. On byways that lead to the coast, small roadside stands offer up a Hawaiian tradition of welcome: garlands of fresh flowers known as leis. Hawaiians, a Polynesian people, first arrived here in double-hulled canoes more than 1,000 years ago. As the sun dips into the gold-dappled ocean, there's one more reason to pull off the road: a Hawaiian luau. It's a celebration that's part ritual and part entertainment. The performers use song and dance to tell age-old stories about Polynesian gods, history, and lives on these glorious islands. What a grand way to end this journey through America's tropical paradise. The next adventure starts back on the mainland, almost 3,000 miles east of the Hawaiian Islands. This route leads from Flagstaff in Arizona and skirts the Grand Canyon along Route 64. In northern Arizona, the aspen trees and arid landscape give no hint that one of the greatest wonders of the natural world lies just ahead. Driving closer, it's hard to catch more than a glimpse of the marvel beyond. Then, suddenly, there it is, the Grand Canyon. The park offers dozens of opportunities to pull over and behold the splendor of this place. The canyon bottom is a breathtaking drop of more than 5,000 feet and runs through the desert as far as the eye can see. Incredibly, the canyon is only about 6 million years old, a recent arrival in geological terms. It was formed by the mighty Colorado River channeling its way through the soft sedimentary rock. Leaving the car behind, one great way to navigate the steep canyon walls is astride sure-footed mules. They wind their way up and down Bright Angel Trail. The first Europeans to see the canyon were Spaniards under the explorer Francisco Vázquez de Coronado in 1540, but it would be another 300 years before it was fully explored. Much like Coronado, the first American explorers came in search of gold and wealth, but to no avail. Despite over a century of prospecting, no riches have been revealed. At the bottom of the canyon, a surprise awaits. Built in 1922, Phantom Ranch still provides a welcome oasis along the trail. Guests can stay here overnight in comfortable bunkhouses and cabins. At the trail's end, the Colorado River is a great place to take an ice-cold dip. It's hard to imagine how this seemingly placid river carved through so much stone. Soon, though, the river reveals itself as a mighty engine of erosion. And harnessing that force makes for a wild ride. The rapids and falls of the Colorado River are a whitewater rafter's dream. Despite desert-like temperatures, life thrives. Along the riverbanks, rafters can spot great blue heron fishing the waters, and bighorn sheep clambering along the steep slopes and rocky banks. But even the wild Colorado River can be tamed. To the west of the Grand Canyon stands the Hoover Dam, one of man's most spectacular engineering marvels. The awesome power of the river is held in check by more than 6 million tons of concrete and steel. The dam's turbines supply electricity to 1.3 million people. At the end of the day in the canyon, the red and orange of the rock walls reflect the light of the sun as it begins to dip past the rim, making the air and water shimmer. Soft hues and gentle light belie the power of this amazing place. But as night approaches, it's time to move on to another journey. Our next adventure traces the gorgeous Pacific Ocean along Big Sur and Coastal Route 1. From there, the road heads inland to the wonders of Yosemite National Park. Big Sur, a place where steep cliffs drop hundreds of feet into the powerful Pacific Ocean, and the road hugs the mountain's many curves. One of the first European explorers, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, sailed past these walls and declared that this was a land with mountains that seem to reach the heavens. Settlement along Big Sur's wild coast remains sparse to this day, and it wasn't until 1937 that this road, Route 1, was built, the first to span the entire coastline. And it's a wonder it could be built at all. Vaulted bridges and mountain-clinging roads make this a marvel of modern engineering. Along this coast at places like Pfeiffer Beach, the surging waves have done their own skillful carving, creating sea arches and blowholes. But even at Pfeiffer Beach, the ocean relents, allowing for a stroll. Stopping at this stretch of sandy shore, you'll find a great place to fish. The cold waters offshore are rich in marine life. Seals, drawn here by the fish, pull up onto shore to sun themselves. Pelicans rest between meals. Further along at the coastal cliffs of Byrne State Park, McWay Creek slips through the forest and plunges some 80 feet to the sea. From the magnificent Pacific and the jagged cliffs of Big Sur, the road heads from Coastal Route 1 and carries northeast to the heart of the Sierra Nevada mountains. It leads to California's Eden, Yosemite National Park, founded in 1890. This magnificent realm of lofty peaks, crystal clear waters, and forested valleys has inspired generations, from the naturalist John Muir to the photographer Ansel Adams. Hemmed by such famous sights as El Capitan and Half Dome, the Yosemite Valley sits along the west side of the 748,000-acre park. Roads wind along the valley bottom, threading between the granite peaks. Deeper inside the valley stands a grove of the oldest living residents of this grand landscape, the sequoias. As the most massive living things on Earth, they can grow to 300 feet and live incredibly for more than 2,000 years. Some trees have been known to sustain 6 lightning strikes in a single storm and seem little worse for wear. People have lived in this realm for at least 4,000 years. Although the local Native Americans called themselves the Awanichi, they were given the name Yosemite, and so the valley and park still bear this title. The Merced River runs through the heart of Yosemite Valley, and the pure, cold water that feeds from the Sierra Mountains above makes it the perfect habitat for trout. While some fish or sail beneath these majestic spires, others soar among them. But you don't have to risk life and limb to explore the park. Yosemite's trails draw visitors along some of the best riding and hiking paths in the world. Dozens of trails lead hikers along routes up to the pinnacles overlooking the valley. A few even climb straight up some of the highest unbroken cliff faces in America. The view from on top of Half Dome opens onto a scene sculpted more than 10,000 years ago in the last ice age, when only the very tops of these mountains, some over 3,000 feet tall, remained above the ice. The snow and glaciers of the Sierra Mountains are the source of much of the water that runs through Yosemite. The park consists of far more than its famous valley. An excursion into the Sierra Mountains beyond is rewarded by views of vast, open landscapes. They seem as pristine and untouched as when they were first set into trust more than 100 years ago. With the sun setting on this wondrous realm, the words of naturalist John Muir come to mind. He wrote that Yosemite is surely the brightest and best of all the Lord has built. The next stop on our journey starts on the California coast, 280 miles north of San Francisco at Eureka, and carries into Redwood National Park, then ends at Oregon's Crater Lake. This drive begins in the charming town of Eureka in Northern California. Named by an early pioneer in ancient Greek, Eureka means, "I have found it." Eureka is still an inviting hamlet to discover for yourself. As you pass along its roads, you'll find that more Victorian-style structures stand here than in any other American town its size. This was once a raucous frontier town, but today, Eureka and nearby towns are far more sedate, almost storybook. Crossing the threshold into the gingerbread mansion is akin to stepping back into America's past. It seems little can match late 19th century craftsmanship and attention to detail. The Victorians imposed their sense of order onto the outdoors as well. Their gardens reflect their desire to give order and structure even to nature. But a land that has never been tamed awaits just outside of Eureka along Route 101. This is Redwood National and State Parks. Only an hour from Eureka, it could be an entirely different world. One inhabited by giants. Close relatives of the sequoias in Yosemite, redwoods are the tallest trees on the planet. Some grow higher than the Statue of Liberty, Goliaths that may have taken root just as the first biblical accounts of the birth of Jesus were being recorded. Even in this land of natural skyscrapers, some trees stand out. A few are so massive, we can comfortably drive through tunnels carved from their living trunks. The redwood groves are a great place to get out of the car and walk around. Since 1968, this thin coastal strip of California has been off limits to loggers. Today, there are almost 50,000 protected acres of old-growth forest in these mist-filled valleys, providing a sanctuary for the rich diversity of life that resides in the mighty trees' shadows. Just outside of the park stands the little town of Crescent City, where the redwoods meet the sea. This is Battery Point Lighthouse. During high tides, the sea cuts Battery Point off from the mainland, and for a few hours each day, it becomes an island. From Crescent City, Route 101 leads north and east towards Oregon and Crater Lake. This peaceful setting belies the explosive event that formed this landscape. some 7,700 years ago, a volcano called Mount Mazama exploded and collapsed in on itself. Today, the crater or caldera that is left behind is known as Crater Lake. Where fire once broiled, blue waters now flow. This is the deepest lake in all of the United States, reaching depths of almost 2,000 feet. Despite their otherworldly names, Phantom, Ship, and Wizard Island make for popular boating destinations. With the crater walls reflected in the surface, it seems as if these calm waters could be called God's mirror. And it is the perfect home for birds, such as this gray jay. The eruption of Mount Mazama must have been terrifying to the Native Americans living in this region at the time. Their legends tell of how the gods of the underworld and skies battled at this site. But today, it is hard to leave such a serene, beautiful setting behind. The next adventure begins just southeast of Seattle, Washington, at majestic Mount Rainier, and leads to the incomparable Olympic National Park. Mount Rainier's stature is so extraordinary, locals simply refer to it as the mountain. Dormant for now, this volcanic peak stands at the heart of Mount Rainier National Park, a singular refuge for the Pacific Northwest's diverse plants and wildlife. Reaching over 14,000 feet, Mount Rainier is the second highest peak on the entire West Coast. A lone giant, it towers above the Cascade Range. Starting at the mountain's base, Rainier is a great place to get out of the car and explore some of the park's 235,000 acres. As you begin to climb, water runs strong from the snow and ice melting on the slopes and falls in a glorious variety of cascades. The Park Service has cut trails that rise past ponds toward the mountain and into subalpine meadows tinged by a bounty of wildflowers. A breathtaking variety of plants grow here, from the delicate avalanche lily to the sturdy skunk cabbage. Climbing higher, there are fewer hikers, but some of nature's creatures do appear. Bobcat, bear, mountain goat, and even mountain lion make this sanctuary their home. Right up to the edge of Rainier's glaciers, flowers and animals flourish, taking advantage of the brief, warm months of summer. On Rainier's upper slopes, climbers find some of the most rewarding ice hiking in the country, with breathtaking views. Flanked by more than 25 glaciers, Mount Rainier is capped with a greater volume of snow and ice than any other peak in the continental U.S. In all seasons, a host of heavenly clouds swirl around this unyielding peak. It's easy to see why Native Americans called this place the mountain that was God. As the sun sets, it's time to head for another temple of nature, this one even more diverse than Rainier. Many scenic drives provide incredible vistas, but few can match the combination of ocean and rainforest found in Washington's Olympic Peninsula and its national park. This leg of our trip begins on Rialto Beach, where our nation edges the Pacific. Surrounded on three sides by water, the Olympic Peninsula is a wondrous realm of rain, sea spray, and mist. Fog shrouds James Island, and waves carve out this formation called Hole in the Wall. Inland along the Hoh River are stands of virgin old-growth forest. Here the valleys trap the fog, moderating the weather and keeping it wet year-round. With as much as 142 inches of rainfall each year, this part of the Olympic Peninsula is a temperate rainforest, a fantasy land of fragile ferns and moss-covered titans. A giant of a different sort appears. Bull elk can weigh over 1,000 pounds and stand 5 feet at the shoulder. Olympic National Park was almost called Elk Park at its founding in 1938. And it's not unusual to find herds grazing peacefully today. Heading south, the road leads to Lake Quinault. This tree-lined, glacier-fed lake is a popular recreation destination for many locals. It's a great place for nature lovers, too. Bird watchers will likely catch sight of yellow rump warblers and juncos. Back on the coast, the fog has lifted, revealing an ageless view of the sea stacks beyond. This shoreline has been home to Native Americans for at least 12,000 years. The Makah Nation's culture was based on the sea, and they carved dugout canoes from red cedar logs, using them to hunt and fish the waters. Today, their descendants still rely on the oceans and rivers for food, and continue to smoke salmon the old-fashioned way. A harbor seal and a cluster of gulls search for their own dinner as the sun sets behind the Pacific. Our next adventure carries us through central Washington state from the old west town of Winthrop, then west into the untamed North Cascades National Park. Only 200 years ago, central Washington was unspoiled wilderness. Along some of its byways, you can still find horses like these Clydesdales that help to turn backwoods into prime farmland. But if it's the old-time West you're seeking, Winthrop, Washington is a must-see. Winthrop has put on an early Western mining town look, hearkening back to the rowdy times when the West was still being won. Here, cowboys ride tall. And visitors can get a feel for what life must have been like 100 years ago. Heading west out of Winthrop, Route 20 leads into another realm where man has left few marks. On the border between Canada and Washington State lies one of our nation's greatest hidden treasures, a preserve that was set aside only in 1968. Known as the American Alps, the North Cascades National Park contains peaks that soar to frozen heights of more than 9,000 feet, as well as pine-covered valleys. In the Cascades, man seems to have made little impact, and much of this land is pristine. The road passes through dense, gorgeous forests. And in places, you'll literally drive through the land itself and into the heart of the Cascade Range. Here, Route 20 is known as the North Cascades Highway. It traces Diablo Lake, where a scenic overlook reveals the water's unusual green tint. Diablo Lake is fed by glacial streams, and it's a fine silt or glacial flour that gives it this hue. But even more wondrous sights lie ahead. Further west, almost at the park's boundary, towers mighty Mount Shuksan. A giant at over 9,100 feet, chiseled Mount Shuksan stands out even in a range that includes peaks named Mount Triumph, Mount Despair, and Mount Terror. What a great scene to end this tour of the lower 48. The final drive is to America's last frontier, Alaska. Starting in Anchorage, our route takes the Seward Highway east and south, then drives along the Sterling Highway through the Kenai Peninsula to Ninilchik. Almost from the instant you leave Anchorage on the Seward Highway, you encounter Alaska's rugged wilderness. And the road ahead leads to even greater wonders, a realm of vast mountain ranges, pure glacial streams, and endless ice fields. First, the Seward Highway traces an inlet known as Turnagain Arm, named by the famous explorer Captain Cook. Tides in this narrow channel can range almost 40 feet from high to low, and the waters race in and out. This trip through the North Star State continues along Route 1. Then, into the Chugach National Forest. The road bores through the mountains and leads to Portage Lake. Here, many icebergs float on the water, calved from the mighty Portage Glacier that runs into this valley from between the mountains beyond. Farther south lies an even more massive body of ice and snow, the Harding Ice Field. This ice field covers some 300 square miles of the peninsula's interior, a glorious frozen wonderland of stark whites and dazzling blues. Fingers of the ice field dip into the Gulf of Alaska on the east coast of the peninsula, a gorgeous setting where mountains, glaciers, and sea converge. As the glaciers push down into the ocean, they give birth to, or calve, great chunks of ice. These break off and crash into the water. The smaller pieces can serve as an ice bed if you're a seal. This far north, the sun barely sets in the summer. And rivers and streams run strong in these warm months as the snow and ice melt. The Kenai Peninsula is famous for its salmon. In the spring and summer, salmon swim upstream from the ocean to spawn, using the gravel to build underwater nests. Amazingly, salmon return to the very same places they were hatched, somehow remembering the taste of the waters where they were born. A little fishing town stands just off the beaten path of the Sterling Highway. Ninilchik was one of this area's early European settlements. The first settlers arrived here from Russia in 1842. Russian Orthodox services were first performed here in 1846, and this church was dedicated on its present site in 1901. Today, even though Alaska became American property in 1867, many of Ninilchik's residents, population 597, carry on the old traditions. Beyond the outskirts of little towns like Ninilchik, the Alaskan wilderness quickly reclaims whatever men abandon. Even at the height of summer, temperatures rarely top 70 degrees here, and rain and fog often shroud the coast. But the very wildness of Alaska is what draws creatures like these majestic humpback whales. They are paragons of cooperation. Using clicks and trumpet-like calls, humpbacks seem to communicate as well as human beings. They travel in groups or pods and synchronize their movements to chase and capture krill and small fish. They cover great distances, migrating as far south as Hawaii. The same starting point as for this driving adventure. As the sun dips briefly over the horizon, a strange, fantastic light flickers, then begins to dance. It plays across the sky, marking the end of our trip. This is the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, nature's most spectacular light show. What a stirring finale to this wondrous journey along America's most scenic drives.